As someone who loves behind the scenes Nintendo stuff, their commitment to Ask the Developer interviews has been really fun to see. But the Mario and Luigi Brothership interviews contain one interesting little tidbit that I think is worth discussing. And from that tidbit, I've been doing a bit of a deep dive, and I think we can start to see the contours of a rejigged Nintendo development operation in Kyoto, Japan. Like, subscribe, settle in, and I'll take you through what I found. So, first up, in the Brothership interview, what caught my attention is not the interview itself, interesting though that is, but in the credits. Akira Atani is credited as part of the Entertainment Planning and Development Department co-production group. Previously, I've given a breakdown of the main development studios working at Nintendo, including their many groups working under the banner of EPD, Entertainment Planning and Development, and it was always heavily speculated that the former EPD1 and EPT2 groups, which focused on outside projects, had merged into a single co-production unit. We have seen these guys credited before, after all, notably with Pikmin 4, where the Ask the Developer interview included not just the core team from EPD10, the team that had historically worked on Pikmin, as well as the Super Mario Bros. And Super Mario Maker series, but also Group 4 and the co-production group, with EPD10 working on both Pikmin 4 and Super Mario Bros. Wonder. A little assist was probably very welcome. But the co-production group's Masamichi Abe was credited as being involved in the project right from the beginning. And of course, Pikmin 4 did benefit from a very heavy co-production input, specifically from developers Eighting, who in this channel's very first video I tipped to have a big hand in Pikmin 4, and in a subsequent credits deep dive, I demonstrated that they did indeed have a very significant part to play in helping to create Pikmin 4. But hang on, EPD2 can't be gone. We know that as recently as the Fire Emblem Engage Ask the Developer interviews, a game not yet 2 years old, we had two people from Group 2 represented on the panel. And there are two explanations possible here. One is that EPD2 may have changed its focus, and now the number 2 moniker is given over to the Fire Emblem team at Nintendo. This would certainly make sense given how important Fire Emblem is becoming with Fire Emblem Heroes' success and the higher profile of the franchise on the Switch, with 5 releases, 2 mainline games, 2 Warriors spin-offs, and the Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light re-release, plus of course Tokyo Mirage Sessions. But I think there's a simpler explanation, specifically that Fire Emblem Engage was completed a long time prior to its release, with evidence that it was assessed by the Ratings Board of Germany in August of 2021, meaning that these credits suggesting that the developers were with EPD2 were retrospective. Perhaps the job titles changed between Fire Emblem Engaged release and Pikmin 4's. In fact, there's a certain logic in doing a rejig like this across a change in financial years. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 also has a credit for Genki Yokota of APD2 after all. But I suspect the co-production group has been a thing in its own right for quite some time, and as we'll see, that's not all that's been changing. Now, Nintendo rejigs its departments from time to time. It's difficult to know too much, though, about how they reorganize, simply because we usually have to wait until credits or developer interviews refer to the internal configurations, which sometimes can be months and often years after they happen. We know that when Shinya Takahashi took over as the general manager of EPD in 2015, he rejigged a lot of the groups around, but I would be surprised if these groups continue to remain static. I noted when Alamo was announced that the Ask the Developer segment for that included a reference to Technology Development Group 1 as being involved, suggesting that Nintendo has multiple groups now dedicated specifically to technology, seemingly an evolution of the old Platform Technology Development Division. We knew that Nintendo had a technology development group, of course. Toru Yamashita, the deputy general manager, was interviewed in connection with the Switch OLED model back in 2021. But the suggestion of multiple groups is a new departure, perhaps suggesting further technological side projects like Alamo, as well as possibly other variants on their consoles. It's also likely things like the Power Band for Super Nintendo World were developed by a technology development department, and if we assume there are only two, though there could be more for all we know, it would make sense for it to be Group 1, with Group 2 working on mainline consoles and their revisions. Still, tracking back to the co-production group, you might say, so what? Nintendo has had co-production units before, and this appears to be a simple case of putting all of their eggs behind one Yoshi. But you see, while there are lots of games which went through a co-production team, notably Mario Sports, Fire Emblem and others in the past, Nintendo often had co-production arrangements via other EPD studios. The Zelda team just this year had partnered extensively with Grezzo to produce Echoes of Wisdom, for example. So I had a look back through some of the past credits. Firstly, Echoes of Wisdom. Here we have Tomomi Sano from EPD3, the Zelda team, and Satoshi Terada from Grezzo. As for Eiji Aonuma, he is simply credited as a senior officer across the entirety of EPD, not specifically with EPD3, the Zelda group. Now, we all know that Zelda is his special corner of the sky, and he has long been associated with EPD3, but in terms of his managerial role at Nintendo, it makes sense that he would be senior enough that he could reach across the individual project groups. But I wonder, is there a specific person from the old EPD2 involved as well? So I looked at the credits, and funnily enough, we have a credit for Tomohiro Yamamura, who has worked with Grezzo multiple times before, including on Ever Oasis, but has also worked on Super Mario Party Jamboree, the Switch Mario Tennis and Mario Golf games, and others. Basically, I feel pretty sure that if he were to have shown up on the Ask the Developer interviews, he would be credited as being part of the co-production unit, as it seems he manages co-productions with Grezzo, Camelot, and others. Then I thought, let's look at the Emio credits. We know that Sakamoto-san has long been attached to EPD7, the group once responsible for Rhythm Heaven, WarioWare, and 2D Metroid games. Well, Rhythm Heaven is in the wind, WarioWare is now the purview of Kensuke Tanabe's EPD6 team, at least as far as we can tell most recently, and as for 2D Metroid, well, I'm not sure. On Emio the Smiling Man, he is not credited with EPD7. Sakamoto is credited only as a producer. On the interviews for Metroid Dread back in 2021, he is credited not with EPD7, but simply as producer. In fact, I don't think that Sakamoto-san has had any role attached to a specific EPD group any longer at all. That's not to say that he's not working, but it strikes me that the midwives of this project are likely to be the EPD co-production team, and it doesn't take long going down the credits to find a credit for Masahiro Shiotani, who coordinated titles as diverse as Detective Pikachu Returns, Princess Peach Showtime, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and New Pokemon Snap. So here's the thing, EPD 1, 2, and 7 appeared to be defunct, and their previous role seems to be now incorporated with the newly minted co-production group. But we know that as recently as September, we had a credit for someone working for EPD3. Has Nintendo decided just to stick with their old numbering system and have the missing groups be an avant-garde way of keeping people on their toes? Don't leak, Nintendo newbies will be warned with a spooky voice, or you'll end up going the way of EPD7. It's not like they have to fill in every number after all. But then again, Nintendo is expanding. They have said several times that they're expanding. Their roll numbers go inexorably up, and they are building a massive new building to accommodate their new members of staff. And there are some curiosities with the old arrangement. EPD2 was keeping its fingers on the pulse of Fire Emblem, Kirby, Pokemon, Xenoblade, a good chunk of Mario spin-offs. What's curious is that some of these are co-productions with what are in effect internal studios, such as Monolith Soft, although my hunch is that Nintendo categorize partnerships with Retro, Next Level Games, Nintendo Cube, Monolith Soft, Nintendo Software Technology and others as still co-productions, since they are based outside the main development hub in EPD. I've long wondered whether they will one day have a team just for the Nintendo-owned partners. After all, these wouldn't truly be co-productions, and so theoretically wouldn't fit under that moniker. Have they then created a new department separate from the co-productions group for managing next level games and so on? And the changes could be broader still. Is it plausible that Splatoon and Animal Crossing could remain in the same group despite strong evidence that their once unified development group is separating into two broadly discrete teams? Sure, there's still a good deal of overlap between the franchise's staff, but then again, it would make a lot of sense for Nintendo to branch out too, with both being such massive franchises for the company. And will Kensuke Tanabe remain with his own team, or will all of his many projects be absorbed into the EPD co-production group, perhaps with Tanabe-san, like Yoshio Sakamoto, being a kind of freelance producer working on the stuff where he has the most impact, such as Metroid Prime 4 Beyond and perhaps Luigi's Mansion 4. We know that Nintendo have already looked at developing particular functions through new studio groups. Nintendo Systems deals with their online infrastructure and development support, while Nintendo Pictures is building up their capacity in motion capture and video production. Now, the EPD co-production group may simply be a renamed EPD2, but even then, you have to wonder why rename unless they wanted to recycle the number. If they managed to make one single department the gateway for every external developer, not just the EPD2 people, but those partners such as Intelligent Systems, Aiting, and Mercury Steam, used in the past by EPD6, 7, and 10, it would make sense in terms of specialization. It would also make sense that Nintendo would cultivate not just game-by-game relationships, but ongoing relationships with studios managed centrally from the same group. Now, this clearly hasn't always been the case. Way Forward's James Montana's new game is decidedly not another Nintendo title, and tragically, not a new Advance Wars title, and for all we know, Arc Systems' Another Code Recollection is not the start of a long relationship that will lead to the triumphant return of Hotel Dusk. But it would make sense for one department to be across all of Nintendo's lost franchises for when they're receiving pitches, rather than having lots of different groups. And this does open another tantalizing possibility. Nintendo is increasingly an IP company, and they have committed to their shareholders that they are making new IP. In the past, new IPs have been side gigs for their established teams. The Animal Crossing team moonlighting on Splatoon, or the Mario Kart team taking a detour to create ARMS. Original IPs haven't for decades been a primary focus of any particular group. Is it possible, therefore, that there are new internal development teams focusing on all new projects? As I said at the top of the video, we can only really infer these changes in retrospect based on what Nintendo share in sources such as the developer interviews. They are naturally cagey about their internal configurations, but it is likely in 2025 that we are going to see a lot of interviews, and I, for one, will be keeping a close eye on how these studios are configured, because my expectation is that there may have been some significant changes backstage. For my possibly slightly outdated but still basically applicable overview of all the current known teams working with Nintendo, do check out the video on screen right now. Thank you so much to my Patreon supporters, and please do like and subscribe so you can come back soon for another Nintendo Forecast.